This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 279 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with garden book author Lorraine Bellato about hydrangea, pruning, and growing tips. The plant profile is on celandine poppy, and we share what's going on in the garden as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on beet companion plants from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Lorraine Bellato. She is the award-winning garden book author of Success with Hydrangeas. She has her new book all about pruning hydrangeas coming out, which we're going to talk all about that, Lorraine. Welcome back to the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Kathy. I really appreciate it.
Great to have you back, and we're going to dive into all those great hydrangea pruning tips and myths and lies, maybe a few of those too. But before we do that, Lorraine, the last time we had you on, it was way back, episode 142, March 2023. What's been going on with you, Lorraine, aside from writing a whole new book?
Well, I wish I could tell you something wonderful and exciting. Well, actually, writing the book, yes, but I had an opportunity last summer to get to Europe to see some of the hydrangeas in Britain, in the UK, as well as in France. And it was a fabulous, eye-opening trip for about 12 days. We traveled all around both countries, both in the UK and then on the continent. I got to see the what I consider to be the premier collection of hydrangeas. It was the French National Collection in I think it was Burgundy. And of course, a lot through the UK. So that was a very special activity for me, from which I took a bazillion ideas, a lot of inspiration, and tons of photographs.
Wow, that sounds like an incredible trip. What time of year was that?
We went in, I want to say the end of June it was, and then came back in mid-July. So I was gone about 2 weeks. It was just great.
That sounds incredible. I'm sure you took thousands of photos.
I did. You'll see a lot of them in the book because many of them are plants that we never see here in the States. We just don't see them, and so and again because of that, we were also there over the Hampton Court Flower Show, which was another wonderful experience. I had seen that when we lived in the UK, so that was great to go back to that again. And as I say, the gardens were just fantastic.
Excellent. Yeah, I've been to Hampton Court, never been to Chelsea, but that's definitely on my bucket list. Definitely. And speaking of hydrangeas and shows, I know in your area there might be hydrangea festivals and that sort of thing. But while we were doing a little pre-interview for this episode, you were telling me that your last book, Success with Hydrangeas, has won a few awards.
Yeah, it really has. I was very pleased to have that happen. It's an indie book, so I'm not coming out of any of the big publishing houses. And to get the attention sometimes that these books deserve, you really have to work extra hard for it, and I did. So the paperback was awarded a gold medal by Indie's Forward Book of the Year, and that was in 2023. And then in 2025, I got the grand prize in what's called the Chanticleer International Book Awards. And that was for the category of instruction and insight. And so those two awards, in addition to the Garden Com award that I had received as well.
And so Success with Hydrangeas, very successful book,
right?
Especially for independent published. And your new book is also independently published?
Yes, it is, because nobody wanted to publish it. They told me it was, they didn't think they were going to make any money on it. They told me it was a niche within a niche. And so it was too focused for them to jump into the fray. So I just went ahead and did it again on my own.
I don't know who they were, Lorraine, but they were wrong. I think probably the number one question I get at any pruning talk I give is going to be hydrangeas, and it's always a topic of every gardener. Everybody brings it up.
I agree, and that has been my experience for 20 years. No matter where I am, no matter the topic I'm talking about, they always want to talk about pruning hydrangeas. Always, always, always.
So let's talk about pruning hydrangeas and your new book. And I love that you start off with why pruning matters and when it doesn't, because I don't know if it's just American gardeners or if it's worldwide, Lorraine, but we prune too much, in my opinion.
You're absolutely right. You know, when I do a presentation on this, I tell people about my father who lived in a veterans co-op in Queens, one of the suburbs of New York City. And of course, for me in Connecticut, I consider that the tropics. You know, that's very warm down there. But he had this fabulous hydrangea in the front of this apartment complex. Nobody ever touched it. I mean, they were lucky that it didn't get mowed down by the crew that came in all the time to take care of the grass and things like that. And they never touched it. And that plant just bloomed its head off year after year after year. So, you know, one of the things I try to impress upon people is if you don't cut it if you don't want to. I mean, many of them do just fine without being cut. I mean, especially our natives. We have two hydrangeas that are natives, which are the woodland hydrangeas, the smooth hydrangeas like Annabelle, and the oak leaf hydrangea. And so they're natives. And, you know, when they show up in the woods, no one's out there pruning them, right? I mean, they just manage to do it on their own. So I do think we prune too much.
Yeah, I think that the only pruning that might happen of those native hydrangeas are by, say, the deer.
Right.
Maybe snipping off the blooms, so that's natural pruning, and or some creature brushes by it, breaks a stem or breaks a branch. And I was just out there today, since we had such nice weather this week, and I was just finger pruning my smooth hydrangeas, just giving them a quick little cleanup, but just kind of overall, like taking off last year's spent blooms just a little bit, but I'm not going in there thinning them out, doing all the work that I'm doing for roses.
Yeah, well, you could get away with that and not have any trouble. The challenge for that, and certainly where I am, and possibly where you are down in your area, is moisture and airflow. You know, you want to make sure that the plant is open enough so that you don't get stagnant air, because when we get into those hot and humid summer days, that's the ideal condition for some of the fungal diseases to take hold. And so opening up the center sometimes, like you do on a rose, might be a good idea from time to time to make sure that the air can circulate properly within the plant.
Yeah, I can really see that, especially with the oak leaf hydrangeas, because those can get big and dense. But most of the smooth hydrangeas, at least the ones I'm growing, are kind of airy-fairy. I would describe them as, like, you know, pretty open already and thin compared to some of those big, thick hybrid hydrangeas, which we'll get into in a minute. So reasons to prune. You know, you want to improve the shrub structure, and like you just said, open it up for airflow. But I would think the number one reason people want to prune is they want more blooms.
Well, at least in the conversations and the people that talk to me, what seems to be motivating them most often is they just want to clean up the landscape. They just want it to be neat and clean. And they go out and they do the pruning to satisfy that requirement, which is the absolute worst thing you can do when it comes to this family of plants. The encouraging more blooms, sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. You know, pruning isn't necessarily going to give you more flowers. It'll give you more growth, but not necessarily more flowers, because you have to have the rest of the cultural conditions that are supportive of producing the flowers. So you could have a lot of green growth and a lot of strong stems, but you might not have any flowers because your soil composition isn't great, or you don't have enough light, or the plant has been stressed because of moisture. You know, those are cultural conditions that will affect the production of the flowers. So it's not just the pruning that does that. And again, that's where a lot of this information gets bandied around on the internet that says, oh, if you just prune, you'll get bigger, better flowers. Not necessarily true.
Yeah, because they're thinking, you know, the pruning of roses, pruning of fruit trees, you're going to stimulate new production, but that's not necessarily the case, as we're saying, for hydrangeas. And of course, we want to remove anything dead, diseased, or damaged, but that goes for any plant, anytime. That doesn't have to be hydrangea pruning time if you see any of those problems. And I would say if you do have a healthy hydrangea and it's not blooming, what do you think, besides maybe the soil, is affecting it?
I actually had that question. I did a presentation last Saturday up in Troy for the Rensselaer Master Gardeners. It was their annual spring garden day. And someone asked me that question. She said, well, I have this great healthy plant, but I never get any flowers. And so, and especially if you didn't get any flowers in 2024, I would tell you to go take up golf. Because that year, every hydrangea in New England and up and down the East Coast bloomed fabulously. But that wasn't the case last year. So what I think you have to do is I think you have to step back, assuming that you didn't have a deer or some animal browse your plant, and you didn't have somebody prune off the flower buds, because they pruned at the wrong time. Then I think you have to look at your cultural conditions. And is the plant getting enough light, for example? Sometimes, because again, the plant is written about as a shade plant. Well, the proper description from my standpoint is the plant is shade tolerant, not shade loving. And that makes a big difference. So you have to give it a little bit of sun, ideally morning sun if you can swing that, but you've got to give it some sun. Otherwise, you're not going to get flowers. I mean, that's part of the formula. So that's one thing, is the light. The second thing is the soil, for sure. You want to make sure that that soil composition is right, that it's good, that it's organic, that it can retain moisture to a certain degree, that it's not too wet, by the way, because that's the other problem you can have, and that it has the right level of nutrients in it. What we're not talking just about nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We're talking about micronutrients, which the plant needs to survive. It needs calcium, for example, and manganese and some of those other trace minerals. And that's all part of the fertilization program. And then, of course, the last thing is moisture. If that plant is stressed because it's not getting enough water, or it constantly goes dry for some reason, you've got to make sure that you don't put it into stress, because when that plant gets stressed, what it does is it stops everything. Everything stops on it until it can regain its posture. And so it does not produce flowers. It does not work on buds. It just works on getting back to normal, whatever that is. So I think you've got to look at the cultural conditions in addition to everything else before you can say that you are or are not successful in getting flowers from your plant.
And I think that makes so much sense, especially the shade question, because yes, people will plant it in deep shade, or deep shade happens, right? You planted it in part sun, part shade, and that quickly 5 to 10 years later becomes deep shade, and it's not blooming for you anymore.
Well, and the other part of that, because the plant has now got to share light with something else, you also have root competition from whatever it is that's stealing the light, is also stealing the moisture and the nutrients from the hydrangea. So that's double trouble if that's what's developed in your landscape. And that's why you constantly have to pay attention to that.
So if I had a plant that I realize now is in too much shade, too much root competition, maybe in too soggy of a spot, I'll need to dig it and move it. When's the best time to do that?
Actually, I just did a blog post on that the other day. The best time to do that is actually the fall. But if you have no choice, then do it now in the spring. And some people don't have a choice. And the reason you want to wait until the fall is, first of all, you want soil that's nice and warm. That helps the roots get established. It really helps them grow. It really helps them get strong and more quickly. The other part of fall planting is that normally, under normal conditions, you have better rainfall. And so the burden on the gardener to maintain a proper level of moisture is not as significant in the fall as it is, for example, if you plant now. If you plant now, you're coming into the warm part of the year in the Northern Hemisphere, and you're going to be out there. You're going to have to be out there and watch that plant in June, July, and August, because those roots aren't going to be strong enough to pull up the moisture that the plant needs to maintain its viability. So you have to, if you can wait, you should. If you can't, the first thing I would tell you to do is you want to make sure your soil temperature is at least 60 degrees. Now, you don't have to go out and buy one of these expensive soil thermometers. I would say go to the kitchen and get your instant read thermometer and stick it in the ground and make sure you go down about 4 inches, which is where the roots live, and wait until that temperature gets to about 60 degrees. And then I think it's a good time for you to plant if you need to plant in the spring, or transplant, as we were talking about, right? If you need to move the plant around. But wait until that soil gets warm.
Great advice. And I'm imagining all those Mother's Day hydrangeas
Oh,
and people who are buying hydrangeas in pots this spring
right.
talking about when best to get those in the ground, because mostly they're bringing them in the house to enjoy the blooms, maybe for a week or two, and then they're going to look for a spot outside to plant them.
Well, you got double trouble with that one again because most of those gift plants are not designed to be outdoor plants. They're usually bred
Mm,
from a strain of a hydrangea that is not winter hardy or not, again, not able to withstand the normal outdoor conditions. So people don't have a lot of luck with those. They say, well, I must have done something wrong. And the answer is you haven't done anything wrong. Those plants are out there to be used as gift plants. They're out there to be enjoyed as house plants. You put it outside, treat it as an annual if you want until the flowers fade off it. And then when the flowers fade off it, stick it in the compost and just get rid of it because it's just going to break your heart. It's not going to produce the flower
mm.
that you think you're going to get next year, especially if we have a challenging winter.
Yeah, and so we call those in the trade florist hydrangea,
Right,
right? So you'll see them
right.
as that. And the dirty little secret, Lorraine, is that they are have a growth inhibitor applied to them. So
Yes,
that's how that keeps them nice and tight and small.
right.
And if they do come back, say you're in the Carolinas or
Hmm.
Georgia and they are perfectly hardy for you and you stick them in the ground, they're not going to be that cute little round bush anymore.
No, no, they're not. If you get a flower from them, that you're not going to get what you saw when you got it as a gift plant. That's for sure. And
Hmm.
remember, because they're in the container, they've also been treated with fertilizer and with acidifier, so that that flower is that electric blue that we all love, right? That elusive blue flower. And again, you're going to put that plant in your own soil, and your own soil is not going to have the level of acidity or pH acidity that you need to create that blue flower.
Yeah, unless you have very acidic soil, which
Right,
some people do, but most of
right.
us are usually a little more on the alkaline side, especially if you have lots and lots of leaf litter built up and brick house like mine. I'm blaming my brick house for the alkaline dust. Yeah.
And people think that I'll just plant it by my pine tree, right? Because my pine tree likes acid, and so that'll be great for the hydrangea. And that's another one of those myths. That's not true at all. The pine tree does well because it enjoys the same conditions in the soil in which it's planted, not because it
Hmm.
creates an acidic environment. I mean, so pine needles and all of that stuff is no scientific proof to back that up.
Yeah, good to know because I think people add pine fines and pine
Right,
needles around
right,
their acid-loving plants, but you really need to have a fertilizer specifically made for acid-loving plants.
right. And that's assuming that you've done a soil test and you know that you don't
Hmm.
have the right combination of nutrients. If you do your soil test, you might be surprised to find out that you're okay.
Yeah. And you might not need to spend any money or do any effort, but get that soil test first so you're not wasting your
Right.
time and effort and resources without that
Yep. All of
knowledge.
that. All of that.
Well, let's talk about the four blooming categories of hydrangeas, and we'll start off with the first one, which are the old wood bloomers. So this would
Right.
be your oak leaf hydrangea, the climbing, like the schizophrega, if I'm saying the Latin
Well,
correct.
yeah, but lucky for us, they changed that. They took out schizophragma, and now they want us to
Uh-huh.
say hydrangea hydrangioides as opposed to schizophragma hydrangioides. Aren't you grateful?
No.
They all bloom on old wood. That's all you need to know. So you have climbing hydrangeas, you have big leaf hydrangeas, you have mountain hydrangeas, and you have oak leaf hydrangeas. And those are the four that bloom on the flower buds that were produced in the prior season.
And so those you would prune shortly after blooming?
Correct. You could in fact do a little pruning if you wanted to once you see the buds in the new season. Once you see those buds, then you know exactly where your flowers are going to come from in the forthcoming, 2 to 3 to 6 weeks, for example. So you could get a head start if you wanted to, but you have to wait until you see those little flower buds come up. When it comes to big
Hmm.
leaf hydrangeas and mountain hydrangeas, that's referred to as broccoli because they look like little broccoli heads. So once you see
Oh,
those,
yeah.
then you know where your flowers are, and then you can cut to your heart's content without worrying about removing the flower buds for the current season. And you can do the same thing on oak leaf hydrangeas. You can deadhead them because you'll see where the flower buds are. And the same thing is true of climbing hydrangeas. So you could get a jump, but the safest thing to do is to wait until after they flowered, and then you know where your flowers are, right? And then you can, again, cut them back or do whatever maintenance you want to do at that point.
And you had kind of a short window there, like you don't want to go into late summer or early fall.
No, you do not. You do not. You want to wait. The old wood hydrangeas, especially the big leaves and the mountain hydrangeas, they put their flower buds on when two circumstances exist simultaneously. First is short day length, which is after June 21st. And the second condition is nighttime temperatures consistently below 60 degrees. And when that happens, that signals the plant to start producing and working on buds for the following year. It takes the plant about 6 to 8 weeks to do that, to produce those buds, but you don't see them because that's all going on in the stems. And then those buds have to live through the winter time, and whatever weather comes before the next time you see buds come out the following season. So once you hit that bud developing time period, then you've got to put the pruners down. You cannot go near them. If you've got someone that lives with you that wants to go out and prune, I would tell you to send them on a fishing trip. I would tell you to lock up the pruners, right? Hide them someplace. Don't let the hydrangeas get pruned once you've got those nighttime temperatures consistently below 60 degrees.
All right, lock up those pruners.
Lock up the pruners.
The next category. Next category, 2 new wood bloomers.
Right. And those are easy. Those are the Annabelles, for example, the woodland hydrangeas, the smooth hydrangeas. So you have Annabelles, you have all the plants in the Incredible series, all the plants in the Invincible series. They're all smooth hydrangeas, and they all bloom on new wood, which means the flowers that are going to come this year from the stems that are produced this year, and the flowers only come from the top of that stem. And the same thing is true with the panicle hydrangeas. Things like Limelight, Little Lime, Firelight, Quickfire, all of those are all panicle hydrangeas. And they all bloom on new wood. And again, they're absolutely foolproof. I was out today cutting back some of my panicle hydrangeas because I can do it now, right? I don't have to worry about cutting off flowers for this season because those flowers have not even begun to form. The plant's barely leafing out at this point. So those are the easy ones. They are very forgiving. They're practically foolproof.
And that is the dormant season right now. So late winter, early spring. And that's the perfect time to be pruning them if you're going to even prune them at all.
Right.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the ingenious ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
There are 2 studies of panicle hydrangeas. One was done by the Royal Horticultural Society in Britain in the early 2000s, and then another one was done by the Chicago Botanic Garden a little bit later. And over the course of 15 years, between both studies, they pruned the plants, the new wood bloomers, actually the panicles, several different ways. They pruned them practically down to the ground. They pruned them up about, I would say, 4 to 6 inches. And the third technique was only to deadhead them. And frankly, it made no difference. Depending on the variety, it might have made a difference. But, those were plants that were in the marketplace a while back. Some of them don't exist anymore because there's always turnover and there's always new plants being introduced. So you can't get too focused on the exact variety unless you talk to a local garden center or a local gardener, and they'll tell you what their experience has been. But the fact is, it comes right down to it that they've been very forgiving, and you could literally just snip off the buds and walk away and not worry about anything else if you didn't want to.
That's the type of gardening I like, Lorraine. Just walk away, and the easiest, they just take care of themselves. Yes.
Right.
And so our next category, our next category are the rebloomers.
Right. And this is what trips everybody up. We were fine and dandy and happy until 2004, when the first set of rebloomers came into the marketplace, and those were the endless summers. And that was the first set of reblooming hydrangeas. Since then, there are lots more that have been introduced, and the genetics are really interesting because they do rebloom, but they still have to have old wood on them. So you have new wood and old wood on the same plant. So the old wood rules still apply even if it's a rebloomer. You still have to recognize and respect that old wood focus in terms of not going near the plant until you see those little heads of broccoli. Now, if we were speaking about gardeners in Michigan or very cold places, where they have brutal winters, and we know that the flower buds don't survive, but the plant is a rebloomer, they go out in the spring and they cut the plant practically down to the ground. And what they're trying to do is initiate the growth of those new stems in the current season that don't need those two criteria of cold nights and short day length. And they wait and they push that plant so that it produces those new flower buds right away, early season. And then they fertilize like crazy to help the plant get over the shock of that cutback that they just did. And they get flowers from their plants, which before 2004, that was practically impossible. That never happened because the buds never made it through their winters. So rebloomers turn out to be a cold climate gardener's best friend. And I live in an environment where most of the time I get zapped by winter weather conditions or late spring frost for some reason. And I would say, with the exception of 2 plants, everything else I have now is a plant that's a rebloomer, because I want my flowers and I want them early, and I don't want to have to worry about not getting flowers at all through the whole season. And the rebloomers are just great. They really produce wonderful flowers.
Wow. So, Lorraine, just to recap, you're cutting them all the rebloomers way back to just like stubs at the beginning of the season?
I'm not doing that. If I was in Michigan, I'd do that. But what I do is I still wait. I wait it out because I can't tell. Sometimes, we've had tremendous snow this past season, as I'm sure you have. But by the time the big snowfall came, we had already had very cold days. So my buds might have gotten zapped. But if they didn't, that blanket, that 2.5 feet of snow that we had on the ground for 6 weeks, turns out to be a real great insulator. And for all I know, all of these plants, all these buds might have survived that. And so I'm going to wait and see. It was a marginal winter. This is going to be one of those where I'm going to learn a lot to say, okay, now I know for sure that under these conditions, and I can just list them, then I know for sure that these plants will not give me flowers on first pass. And the next time we have a winter like this, please bite my tongue, I shouldn't say that, but the next time we have a winter like this, I will cut them down to about 4 or 5 inches and do what they do in Michigan every single season. But not yet. I'm not ready to take that step. That's very scary for me. Very scary.
Yeah, that it does seem very scary. And I'm like, not a step I'm going to take yet. We had the brutal snow and ice, but we're gonna let it ride out for this year. Right. And I think our next big question on the rebloomers is, do they really rebloom in one season? You were saying you have to really fertilize them to get that second bloom, or how are people getting those continual flushes?
A lot depends on where you garden. So I'm in zone 6 on the map. In reality, I'm really a zone 5. I have microclimates, I have northern exposure, I have all those crazy kinds of things. So I consider my growing zone as zone 5, right? And a lot of these rebloomers, they'll say it's a rebloomer, right? And the plant is hardy, but they'll tell you the hardiness rating is for the plant's survival. So if it's hardy to zone 4, that means it'll live, but that's not necessarily what the bud survival is. Now, so where I am, I don't see warm temperatures, with the exception of a crazy day like today. I don't see warm temperatures until mid-April, maybe May 1st. And then my first cold frost is on around Columbus Day, October 12th. So my growing season is relatively short. If I'm in North Carolina, if I'm in Virginia, if I'm where you are, I would suggest that you have a better shot for rebloomers, because you have a opportunity. You have a longer time period for them to create the to establish the buds, and then have those buds develop and open for you. But I test rebloomers for several things. So I get a lot of trial plants. I'm testing them for reblooming. I'm testing them for stem strength. I'm testing them for flower color, because a lot of claims talk about this flower color and that flower color. And so I'm constantly turning my plants over. I keep them at least 3 years. I have to get through at least 2 winters before I can say it does or it doesn't do what they tell me it's supposed to. And then I'll either keep it for one more if we've had a particularly brutal experience, or I don't need to, because it's proven itself over the course of the 2 or 3 seasons that I've had it. So many of the rebloomers that are touted as rebloomers don't rebloom for me. They might rebloom for you because you're in a warmer place. So that's where you have to talk to other gardeners and talk to reputable garden centers, independent garden centers, and make sure they're not blowing smoke and they're actually telling you the truth, and then that you get a guarantee with your plant for sure, and then give it a try, because that's your best shot. If you have a cold winter, that your best shot is to get a rebloomer, and that way you're going to get flowers eventually.
And so our last category of hydrangea types were the seldom needing pruning.
Right, and that's only the climbing hydrangeas. They barely need anything. They are such tough plants. The only time you're going to cut them is if you have a wayward stem that's reaching for the light, for example, or maybe you've had a storm come through that has dislodged it for some reason. And that's about the only time you need to cut that plant. And other than that, I would just leave it alone, and I would just let it do what it's supposed to do. They're wonderful plants. That there's very little impact from insects, diseases, and the deer don't even like the climbing hydrangeas. I've had them in the property for over 35 years in a lot of different places, and the deer have never touched any of my climbing hydrangeas. Now, I know that all the deer herds are different, and from season to season, they change their habits. I mean, that's a given. But still, all of that being the ground rules, they still haven't touched the climbing hydrangeas at all that I've got. That's the kind of plant I love. It thrives on neglect. I love plants that thrive on neglect.
Exactly. And also that deer ignore.
Right, that deer ignore. Right.
Even better. So I was looking at your book, and I really loved the chapter on essential tools for every gardener. And of course, these are pruning tools mainly. And so I think you have some favorite hand pruners and different tools that you use. But one of them that caught my eye that I don't have, and I don't think I'll ever have used, is a shop vacuum. So how do you use your shop vacuum when you're pruning?
Great. I love the shop vac. So when you're done pruning and cleaning up your plant, what happens with a lot of hydrangeas, especially if you have a plant that has had any kind of disease or insect issue, many of those insects and many of those diseases overwinter in the leaf litter and overwinter at the base of your plant. And so what I suggest to people is that you take that shop vac and you vacuum the base of your plant. Just suck up all of those dead leaves, and maybe you get a little bit of extra dirt in there. Maybe you get a little bit of mulch that you really don't want to have, but you really want to push everything away from the base of the plant, and you want to make sure that the base of that plant is almost antiseptically clean, because the pathogens will re-inoculate your plant as soon as the conditions are right. They make it over the winter. The insects will do the same thing. As soon as the conditions are right, they will start to emerge, and they'll go after your plant. So the shop vac for me turns out to be even better than hand raking. I used to always hand rake until someone told me about, why don't you use your shop vac? And I said, oh, what a great idea, right? So I've been using it, and I have to tell you, first of all, it looks great, right? You have this nice, neat looking plant. And then after you're done with the shop vac, then I go back and I fertilize and I scratch the fertilizer in, because I don't want to vacuum up the fertilizer. That's be pretty stupid, right? So you go and you use the shop vac, you clean it all up, and you get rid of all of that stuff. You put all of the things you've collected, it goes in the trash. It does not go in the compost, goes out the door and goes away to wherever the trash goes. And then your plant is ready to go. And so, especially if you've had any kind of disease issues, a lot of people have fungal diseases, which come on the plant practically consistently year after year after year. And I would tell them you have to do a really good cleanup. And the way you do that is with the shop vac. The shop vac really works well.
Interesting.
Yeah,
I think if you see any fungal disease, that's a great tool to add to your arsenal. And after you do that scratching in of the fertilizer, do you put a layer of mulch on top?
To some degree, but the fact is you've got to keep the mulch away from the base stems of the plant, because you don't want to maintain moisture around the stems. You don't want those stems to get too soft, because that's what will happen, because that makes them susceptible to insect invasion and, of course, diseases. So you want to pull the mulch away about 4 inches from the base of the plant. And you can use that 4-inch space for your fertilizer. That works out really well. And you can just scratch it in, and, you have your mulch around it, and you're off and running.
And what type of mulch do you like?
Well, we have a lot of trees, and I'm very fond of leaves. I know I'm not supposed to shred them. All the native people are telling me don't shred the leaves because we upset the little insects that are trying to winter over in them. But I do shred to some degree, and I do use the leaves as my mulch. That's my absolute very, very best favorite. And the price is right. All I have to do is rake it or blow it in to the bed. And they sit there all winter long, and they supply nutrients back to the plant, kind of like Mother Nature's natural fertilizer. And so I try to use leaves as most often as I can, because that to me works the best.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. Partially composted leaves, or we can get it locally here if you don't produce your own on site. Could be purchased. One of the brands here is Leaf Grow, but also many municipalities and counties collect leaves and then partially compost them, then have them available free for pickup for residents.
Right. There's a lot written on the internet about people who cruise their neighborhoods with a pickup truck, looking for the leaf bags that everybody leaves out on the street, for pickup. And then they knock on the door, right? And they ask the owner, do you mind if I take your bag of leaves from the street? And that's another way to collect them, right? Depending on the neighborhood you live in. We also have a dump where you can get debris that has been not shredded, but I guess has gone through the chipper. And so we can also go to the town dump and we can pick up things that they've chipped. And we like to use, and they're called arborist chips. And so we like to use the arborist chips as well. But if we have some tree work done on the property, we save those chips. We have them put it on a pile someplace, and then we move those chips around various parts of the property to use as mulch all around. So the arborist chips work and the leaves work. And as I say, the price is right, which works great for me.
Yeah, free is always great. So what is the biggest mistake people make when pruning their hydrangeas?
Oh, well, the biggest mistake is pruning at the wrong time. That is the biggest mistake. They'll prune in the fall, or they'll prune when the plant isn't dormant. A lot of times they'll say, well, I'll prune in the fall, and I want to get a head start in the spring. And so what they do is they go out and they'll prune before the plant has dropped all of its leaves. And that's the wrong thing to do, because pruning stimulates the plant under any condition. Anytime you cut a plant that is not dormant, you will stimulate it. You will stimulate it to grow. It thinks you want it to do something. And at the fall, you don't want to prune it. You don't want to stimulate the plant. You want the plant to get settled down, and you want it to get ready to go completely dormant, so that you want it to work on roots, and you want it to work on strengthening itself so it can withstand what's coming in the wintertime. So the biggest mistake people make with this plant is they prune it at the wrong time. The second biggest mistake they make is they apply an acid-loving fertilizer without knowing that the plant needs the acid. And they don't do the soil test. So there's several products on the market that people like to use that are quote unquote recommended. And I would always tell people not to do that. The other thing is people sometimes like to use a fertilizer. They'll be told to use a balanced fertilizer, like 10-10-10. And I try to discourage that. And the reason for that is no plant uses nutrients in the same amount. And when you put on something like 10-10-10 or 5-5-5, you're doing that. Well, all the numbers are the same. What you're doing is you're contributing to pollution and runoff because the plant can't use those nutrients. It doesn't need it. And so I always tell people, if you have an opportunity and you have a choice, go with some kind of a shrub fertilizer. Anything that has the word shrub on it, you really want to use. If it's granulated, great. If it's organic, even better. And the easiest thing in the world, the absolute easiest thing, is rose food. People say rose food. I say, yes, rose food, because rose food has the micronutrients and it has the NPK that you need, and it's very easy to apply. It's granular and it works really well, not just on roses, but on hydrangeas and on spireas and on just about everything. Maybe not lilacs, for example, but on just about everything in your garden, you could use the rose food. And that simplifies things. I mean, then I don't have to bring home 3 or 4 different kinds of products. I have one bag, 38 pounds or 36 pounds of rose food, gets delivered to my door, so I don't have to drag it or lug it around a garden center. And I'm off and running. And then I can start, which I started to do today. Once I clean up the plant, it's the perfect time to do the fertilizing. So I started that this afternoon when I was working on my panicle hydrangeas. As I cleaned every single one, they got the shop vac, and then they got the fertilizer treatment.
Excellent advice. And so you're doing it at the beginning of the season, at cleanup time. Are you fertilizing monthly again or at other intervals?
The only other interval I would fertilize is if you have a plant that's in trouble and you think that fertilizing, someone has given you a good recommendation that fertilizing is the issue because the soil composition tells them that. If that's not the case, then the only other time you would fertilize would be on any of your rebloomers. Because when the plant puts out a flower, it draws an enormous amount of energy from the plant. And so if I have a reblooming big leaf hydrangea like an Endless Summer or a Let's Dance or one of those, I will be out fertilizing it, I would say, in the early June timeframe, mid-June timeframe, because I want to encourage that second flush of flowers. And so that'll get a second pass. I don't do that on the panicles because they don't bloom a second time. I don't really do it on the Incredibles and the Invincibles, although I could, but I haven't. But I do it on the big leaf and the mountain hydrangeas because those are rebloomers. I have a whole series of Tough Stuff mountain hydrangeas, which are superb plants. And again, they get the fertilizer treatment twice a season.
And so we've talked about pruning, fertilizing, and some other tips about hydrangeas. But I think the other thing that most people are trepidatious about, Lorraine, is watering. So they see it kind of looking wilty, and you've already said overwatering or sitting in a wet spot is a big no-no. But how do we get that happy medium?
Well, the happy medium is you have to use the best tool that you've got, which is your finger. And you stick your finger in the ground, and it's got to be wet or damp up to the second knuckle. If it is not, that's when you need to water your plant. And I would tell you to do that and then go back a couple, 3 hours later and do it again and see whether or not the plant has maintained that moisture level in the soil or if it's still not wet. And then at that point, that would be a clue for you to do one or both the two things. First might be to add compost around the soil, the base of your plant, to the soil around the base of your plant, because compost will help the soil retain moisture. And the second thing is to check your irrigation practices. If you don't have a soaker hose hooked up or you don't have any kind of irrigation system, you've got to figure out how to make sure the plant gets enough water. Now, but here's where people get a little crazy, because what happens is if you've got your plant sited properly and you've got it in morning sun, which is what the recommendation is, when you go to see that plant at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's been in the morning sun all morning, right? And it looks terrible. It looks dry, and the leaves are dehydrated, and it's very obvious. You can see that. And the first thing you want to do is you want to run out and you want to water it. And I would tell you, don't do that, because fortunately, this plant has the great capability to reach back into the surrounding soil and pull up the moisture that is resident in that soil and rehydrate all on its own. So I would suggest you leave the plant alone, wait till it's out of the sun for several hours, then go back and do the finger test and see what you're dealing with. And at that point, if it's dry at your second knuckle, then I would add the water. The problem with adding water is, number one, too much water will give the plant opportunity to make a lot of leaves and not flowers, and that's not what you want. Or the worst case scenario is what you're doing is you're filling the pore space at soil level with water, and you're going to wind up suffocating the plant. Plants need to get oxygen at soil level. And when you are overwatering it, you are filling up all of those empty spaces where the water could be held by the plant, and then you're going to suffocate it and you're going to eventually kill it. So you don't want to overwater it for those two reasons. But again, you use your finger. You don't need a special tool. All you need is your finger, and you can check everything that way.
Great advice, Lorraine. So you have the new book coming out. How can people pre-order it?
So it's available for pre-order on Amazon. I just listed it this week. It'll be there. My expectation is to have it available for sale by April 21st. I know I'm a little bit late this year for people in warm zones, but I know for the northern gardeners, that's probably going to be about the right time. So it'll be available in the next, I would say in 4 weeks, you'll be able to get your own copy of it. And I'm also going out as a paperback and as an electronic version. So you'll have an opportunity for either one or both versions.
Okay. And how can our listeners contact you to find out more?
They can contact me right through my website. It's LorraineBellotto.com. There is a tab on the top that says Contact Me, Contact Lorraine, and you just send me an email and I respond to every single one. So I'd be more than glad to respond back to anybody who comes to me from that web address.
Excellent. And I know you do a lot of speaking to garden groups and clubs and that sort of thing. So when you have or hear about Lorraine coming in your area, definitely attend one of her talks. Do you have any big talks coming up?
I do. I have a talk on roses in April at the Greenwich Botanical Center. I have another one on hydrangeas in Westport, Connecticut, sometime in April, I think. I'm at the Cape in May at one of the garden clubs, but not on hydrangeas. I think it's on low maintenance gardening. So there's a variety of topics about which I speak. Hydrangeas is usually the most popular one, but there are lots of others. So I'm out and about. I post those talks on my site only if they are open to the public. So if it's just the garden club, for example, and it's not open to the public, you won't find it on my site. But you will find anything that is a public speaking option. So anyone who's in the area can pop in and they can come and listen to me. I'm at the Botanical Garden also, the New York Botanical Garden in May. I have a class in May and I have a class there in August. Again, so you just get on the New York Botanical Garden website and you'll be able to find me as an instructor and you'll be able to find my classes.
Excellent. So listeners, definitely check out Lorraine live and in person, and I'm sure you'll have your books along at many of those talks available for signing and selling, correct?
Always. I always have books with me. I carry them around. I carry them around in the car. When I meet somebody in the grocery store, they say, "Oh, I'm in to get on your website. I want to order your book." And I say, "Great. I have one in the car. Wait here." So I'm never without my book, and that'll be plural in another few weeks for sure.
So any final advice, Lorraine, to the beginning hydrangea grower or somebody who has had hydrangeas for a while but hasn't touched them at all pruning wise?
Well, as I said before, if you have hydrangeas and you had them in 2024 and they didn't flower for you, then you've got to go back and look at your cultural conditions, because every hydrangea everywhere bloomed in 2024. So that's the first thing I would tell you. Definitely check your cultural conditions. Those are the only things we can control as gardeners. We cannot control the weather. We cannot control the deer. We can only control the cultural conditions of soil and light and moisture. So always make sure that you've got those lined up the way they should be. And then frankly, if you're new and you have new hydrangeas and you've never had them before, do nothing. Do nothing. Just pay attention. Maybe take some notes, take some photos with your phone so you have some record of what's gone on. And that's the way you're going to learn. to be able to manage their plants and manage your landscape, and do it with a level of enjoyment, hopefully, because this is supposed to be fun, right? I mean, this is not supposed to be a chore. So I would tell you, do nothing. If you don't know what to do nothing, and then sit back and enjoy the plant.
Thank you so much, Lorraine.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turf grass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of their lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with you all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
Celandine poppy, plant profile. Celandine poppy, Stylophorum diphyllum, is a perennial that is native to the eastern United States. It's also known as yellow wood poppy, and woods poppy. It has numerous bright yellow flowers in spring. The foliage is a pretty gray-green and deeply lobed. There are Asian species of Stylophorum as well. Celandine poppy is commonly confused with the non-natives, Greater Celandine, Chelidonia majus, and Lesser Celandine, Ranunculus ficaria. These are both aggressive spreaders. Celandine poppy is in the poppy family and is related to bloodroot, bleeding hearts, and Japanese wood poppy. It's hardy to USDA zones 4 to 9. It grows to about 18 inches tall and wide. It prefers moist, humus-rich soils in part to full shade. It will go dormant in summer if allowed to dry out. Celandine poppy is low maintenance. It does not need fertilizing. It is self-sowing and can be easily propagated by division. Because the foliage and the yellow-orange sap that the plant produces are toxic, it is avoided by deer. Ants, mice, and chipmunks feed on the hairy capsule-like fruits and disperse the seeds. The flowers are visited by various pollinators, including native bees and syrphid flies. Celandine poppy, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, my forsythia is blooming along with my weeping hydrangeas cherry tree. Minor bulbs like grape hyacinths and scilla are putting on their show. Over at the community garden plot, we planted our carrots and radish. In garden tips that we shared this week, we talked about daffodils, including the tip from daffodil breeder Brent Heath that daffodils don't stop blooming due to overcrowding, as commonly believed, but instead too much shade or depleted micronutrients in the soil can cause them to stop blooming. So if yours are slowing down, move them to a sunnier spot, and add a mineral fertilizer like azomite. In local gardening events that you might want to attend, mark your calendar for Virginia Historic Garden Week, April 18th through 25th, 2026, of course. And then there are several Garden Conservancy open days happening in our region, including one in Lexington Park, Maryland on Saturday, May 16th. On Saturday and Sunday, May 16th and 17th, the Beyond the Garden Gates Garden Tour is happening in Frederick, Maryland. And Flower Mart 2026 is happening at the Washington National Cathedral on Friday, May 1st and Saturday, May 2nd. Happy gardening!
This is The Last Word by Christy Page with Food Gardening Network with beet companion plants. What to grow with beets. One of the many things I love about beets is the excuse they give me to grow some tasty beet companion plants. To be clear, I'm happy to have a garden full of beets just because I love beets. But like tomatoes, which offer a great excuse to plant more basil, beets and several other plants work especially well together. Beets are relatively easy to grow and they mature quickly. In addition, they're a cool weather crop, so you can get 2 or even 3 harvests throughout the year. And you can store beets for quite some time and in a variety of ways, from canning them to pickling them to burying them in a root cellar. Beets need between 45 to 65 days to reach maturity. So if you want to increase your beet harvest, plant new seeds every 2 to 3 weeks for a month or so, but only in regions where the high temperature tops out at 75 degrees Fahrenheit or less. Temperatures higher than that will cause your beet plants to bolt, rendering the roots too tough to eat and the leaves too bitter. But what can you plant with them and why? Here are 7 beet companion plants you'll want in your garden. Companion planting matches plants with soil and nutrient needs that are different enough that they help rather than hinder the growth of both plants. Companion planting also helps add nutrients to the soil, reduce soil erosion, and shelter your beets from harsh weather and hot sun. Good companion plants can help attract beneficial insects and deter pests, from tiny insects to hungry, herbivorous mammals like rabbits and deer. You'll still want to keep an eye out, however. Pests on your beets left unchecked can damage and destroy your developing plants. Keeping a close watch on your plants during regular daily inspections will help you spot any pests before they can do any irreparable harm. Healthy beets can bounce back from pest damage if you catch the pests quickly. Now here are those companion plants. Number 1, Brussels sprouts. Along with other vegetables, make great beet companion plants. Beets help enrich the soil, leading to fabulous broccoli, cabbage, and more. 2, bush beans. Beets need plenty of sunshine, and pole beans can cast too much shade. Bush beans, however, add nitrogen and nutrients to the soil, while beets add minerals that the beans need. 3 is lettuce. Beets and lettuce grow well together since they both enjoy cooler weather. And while beet roots can develop deep in the soil, lettuce is a shallow-rooted vegetable, so the two don't compete for resources. 4 is mint, and that can be both a good and a bad neighbor. It will grow in the worst condition, it attracts pollinators, and it repels aphids. However, mint will take over your entire garden if you aren't careful. Number 5 is onions. Onions, along with other vegetables that have similar pungent aromas such as leeks and garlic, make good beet companion plants thanks to the fact that they repel several pests. Aphids, slugs, and even rabbits and deer tend to stay away from onions, making your beets a little bit safer from these critters. Number 6 is radishes, and those are some of my favorite beet companion plants. For one thing, you can plant a radish seed in the ground and then enjoy radishes in your salad in 3 short weeks. As far as their compatibility with beets, however, the fast-growing radishes can help loosen the soil for the slightly slower-growing beets. 7 is Swiss chard. This is somewhat of a debatable choice. Swiss chard and beets are in the same family, so they have many of the same requirements around environmental preferences. They like cooler weather, plenty of sunshine, and moderately loose soil. So yes, they do grow well together. The argument against growing those too close is that they attract the same pests. And since you're expanding the dinner table for those pests, there's a greater chance they'll find your garden and have an unwelcome party with your plants. You really could go either way here. One trick I've learned about companion planting is that you don't have to stick to what is written. For example, mint is one of the best beet companion plants because its strong scent helps deter pests. That means that almost any other strongly scented herb will do the same. Sage, basil, rosemary, they're all pretty good at keeping troublesome bugs at bay. This has been the last word on companion plants for beets with Christy Page at foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to Garden DC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to Garden DC Podcast Episode 142, Hydrangea Care and Pruning. Episode 60, Hydrangeas with Andrew Bunting. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too. Happy gardening!